How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to 2A News Now. And as always, I appreciate everybody that takes time to watch my videos, as well as those that help the channel out and help it to continue to grow by liking, sharing, and subscribing and hitting those post notifications. And I really do appreciate it. I've got another ATF horror story for you. And this video might be a little bit longer than usual. And here's a little bit of backstory for you. Back in 2021, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a state law. It was Texas House Bill 957, and here's what the bill was all about. A firearm suppressor that is manufactured and remains in the state is not subject to federal law or federal regulation, including registration under the authority of the United States Congress to regulate interstate commerce. And the state law requires that all the silencer parts, basically the material that makes one, are not subject to federal regulation. And also suppressors that are made in the state of Texas must have made in Texas clearly stamped on them. So like I said, that was in 2021. And 2 years ago, a guy that had his own gun parts shop in Texas, and I remind you, a gun parts shop, he wasn't an FFL, he didn't sell any firearms or anything like that at all, just accessories, and was located in northeast Texas close to the Oklahoma border. The shop was run by a guy named Peter Brennan, as well as his wife, Jacqueline Shaw. And at that time, their son was 8 years old. And 2 years ago, the ATF raided his parts shop. He said they pulled into the parking lot of his gun shop, and cars surrounded his truck. And he said there were 7 vehicles. And in his words, a load of tactical guys jumping out of them. He said he didn't know what was happening, and he knew that he hadn't done anything wrong. And of course, like the agents try to do, they try to separate the family, even the son from the mother. He even said they tried to yank his son from his mother's arms. They handcuffed him and put him in one of the cars. He said one of the agents said, "You know why we're here, not by accident." And he replied, "That's debatable." And then they proceeded to tear apart his shop. He said, "Look, you guys, you don't make mistakes." He said nothing in the shop is illegal in Texas. And he said he wanted a lawyer. And I can guarantee you all of this was part of just them intimidating him, because they seized a lot of his property, including buffer tubes, CNC tools, aluminum blanks that were just blocks of metal, and parts to ARs. They even took his hard drive out of his CNC machine that he had recently purchased for a price of $170,000. And then the ATF wasn't done there. They took him, his wife, and his son back to their home where they could execute a search warrant there. And once they arrived at his home, they took their passports because they're originally from Australia. And now it's 2 years later and they still haven't returned their passports. They also took their phones and their computers. Oh, and by the way, they took all of their money. And then before they left, they told them to call them in a couple of days on Thursday. And since they took all of their money, the only money he had left, which was in his pocket, which was $40. And the ATF actually threatened them if they decided to get new passports and go to Australia. They even said if they went to the embassy, they would arrest them. They had a YouTube channel and somehow they were able to shut it down. And like I said, they took his money and they had no food. So I told you this raid was 2 years ago. And I also said that they took their passports and they still haven't been returned. But also, they've never been charged with a crime. And get this, they have older children in Australia that they haven't seen in 2 years. He said he loves America and he fought hard to be here. And he would be more than happy to trade his Australian citizenship to become an American citizen. He said the ATF's use of force was unconscionable. Mr. Brennan said the ATF actually pointed guns at his 7-year-old son. His wife Jacqueline said, as a result of what happened that day 2 years ago, his son has developed some type of a tic. They said the ATF agents wouldn't let their son go to the mother or the father. In my opinion, that's traumatizing the child. After Mr. Brennan opened his gun parts shop, a lot of his customers started asking him about suppressors, and he would get asked about them all the time. And they weren't familiar with the law in Texas. And they told them that you can sell suppressors in Texas if they're made in Texas and they stay in Texas. And they even showed him the law. So Mr. Brennan started to make suppressors, of course, all according to the state law. And he said about 80% of his business were law enforcement. He sold them to Texas state troopers, as well as other local law enforcement agencies. They even put signs up on the windows of their shop to let customers know the silencers they made inside their shop were subject to Texas law. And whenever the ATF would show up to a visit at this shop, they didn't say anything about those signs. He said whenever the ATF agents showed up, they really didn't care anything about the suppressors that they were selling. They were more concerned about pistol braces at that time. All the parts for the suppressors were made locally. And 3 months before the raid, the last visit that he had from the ATF, they still hadn't mentioned anything about the suppressors. Mr. Brennan actually said that particular agent was at the raid at the time. So as we can most likely guess, he was casing out the joint. He told the agents he's never sold a firearm and that the only guns he had were his. He's never had an FFL and he didn't want one. And he never wanted to sell firearms at all. And that today he still doesn't want an FFL. And when that same agent interviewed his wife, she told him he was there 6 weeks before the raid, and he never told them to stop making suppressors. In 2021, not too long after the governor signed this bill into law, the ATF sent an open letter to all Texas FFLs. And here's what that letter had to say. HB 957 claims to exempt silencers, also known as suppressors, that are manufactured in Texas and remain in Texas from federal firearms laws and regulations, including the federal registration requirements. However, because HB 957 directly conflicts with federal firearm laws and regulations, federal law supersedes HB 957. In summary, all provisions of the Gun Control Act and the National Firearms Act, including their corresponding regulations, continue to apply to FFLs and other persons in Texas. So basically, the open letter said, go to hell with your state rights. And according to the ATF, homemade silencers still remain a violation of federal law. So even 2 years later after the raid, they still haven't got their passports back. They haven't been charged with any crimes. He started doing this because law enforcement asked him to. And now Mr. Brennan and his family are trying to get things up running again. He now has a new YouTube channel, and they're still trying to recover financially. And now at his gun parts shop, he makes AK accessories and also ear protection for the police, as well as other type of law enforcement. He said the ATF could have simply sent him a cease and desist letter, but they chose what the ATF always does, to raid somebody's business. The ATF seized some of his property. They seized his passports, and this was 2 years ago, and they've been charged with no crimes, and they haven't got any of their property back. And it sounds like Donald Trump's ATF need to look into this as soon as possible and make things right for this family. As always, I would really like to hear your thoughts about today's video in the comment section. And as I mentioned at the starting of the video, I appreciate everybody that supports the channel, and I invite all of you to come back and watch my next video.